The Jets head coaching search continues. We've heard a few names over the last few days. Aaron Glenn, Marvin Lewis, and Robert Saleh are set to interview for the New York Jets. Jets, Jets! Welcome to Jets Talk. My name's Ryan. I'll be your pilot today. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. If you've been here before, welcome back. I love having you here. Guys, we'll be live January 11th, 8 o'clock for the Ohio State-Alabama National Championship game. It's going to be me, Green Bean, and O'Leary, so make sure you tune into that to get all our opinions on Justin Fields and the head coaching search and just basically all the rumors that have been flying in the last week or so. So tune into that. I'll leave a link in the description down below. But let's move on to today's video. Let's talk about the three candidates that the Jets are bringing in for interviews to be their next head coach. First up on our list is Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn was a longtime Jet. He was drafted by us in the first round, picked 12th overall in 1994, and was with us till 2001 when we lost him to the expansion draft when the Texans came into the league. Now, he bounced around the league a little bit after that, and then since then, 2012, 2013, was actually a personnel scout for the New York Jets, and he's been the DB coach in New Orleans for about the last 5 years or so. So let's talk about this. What do we think? Well, I love the idea of bringing in a former Jet as a head coach or as a coordinator or something like that, because I think there's a passion or at least a loyalty to the team that you don't see with some other candidates. Another reason I like this is Marshon Lattimore. Marshon Lattimore is a fantastic cornerback for the New Orleans Saints who's going into the last year of his contract, and if the Jets were to bring in Aaron Glenn, I would expect them to try and work out some type of trade for Lattimore. Lattimore is, like I said, last year of his contract. Saints are $90 million over the salary cap. Chances are they're not going to have the resources to re-sign him, so I think the Jets could solve a potential cornerback one need by bringing in Aaron Glenn. So if we do that, keep an eye on that type of trade because that's someone that I have been sort of mocking to us for a while. And Aaron Glenn, I actually, as a defensive coordinator, I mocked to us when I was talking about the whole Joe Brady and, that whole, mock draft I had midseason. So I like Aaron Glenn a lot. I would be very on board with this. I don't necessarily love him as a head coach because he hasn't really done the whole coordinator thing yet. But, I could get on board if they think he can actually lead a room of guys as the head coach and oversee the whole operation. I'm all for it. I think this speaks to me more as a defensive coordinator role, but either way, I'm keeping my eye out for Aaron Glenn. The next person the Jets interviewed was Marvin Lewis, and that is a name that a lot of Jet fans kind of think and are like, ugh, Marvin Lewis, this is like the Costco brand of head coaches. Like why do we want Marvin Lewis? It doesn't make sense. Let me go over some of his history and I'll kind of, let's dive into it just a little bit. So, he was the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens back in 2000 when they only allowed 970 rushing yards and the fewest points scored in a 16-game calendar season with 165 points. So this guy is a legitimate defensive mind. He led that unit with Ray Lewis. It was a freak performance. They capped it off with a Super Bowl win over the Giants. The Giants had 16 possessions in that game. There were 11 punts, 4 interceptions, and the final possession of the game ended the game. So those were the possessions that they had in the Super Bowl. That's incredible. I don't know if you can have a better stat line than that. Now, Joe Douglas and Marvin Lewis overlapped at their time at Baltimore. So that's where that connection comes in. I actually mocked Marvin Lewis to us when I had the whole idea of Brian Daboll coming in, or basically any first-time offensive-minded head coach. I think Marvin Lewis would be a really, really sound hire if you want to try and develop a culture. This is a CEO type hire here. Now, there's going to be a lot of knocks with Marvin Lewis. He was 131, 122, and 3 as a head coach, and he was known for basically having the convicts of an NFL roster. I want to say there was 44 arrests in the stretch of time that he was with the Bengals. It was 9 DUIs, a ton of different assault cases, domestic abuse. There were a lot of not so great players on that Bengals team. Now, that being said, and there's going to be a lot of people that are like, oh, this is not that great. Well, I usually try to gauge people on the situation they went into and did they make it better from when they originally started. So if you look at the Bengals before Marvin Lewis and the Bengals after Marvin Lewis, and you consider that the Bengals are the cheapest organization when it comes to free agents, they don't pay anyone money, it's like pulling teeth. This organization legitimately did not have Gatorade on the sidelines until Marvin Lewis got there in 2003. In the 2000s, they still had water bottles. It was they could not get anything done in Cincinnati, and Marvin Lewis completely changed that culture. But let's look at the records of the Bengals leading up to and after Marvin Lewis. So before, in the seasons leading up to Marvin Lewis, they were 19-61. That was in like, what was that, 5 seasons? And then after that, they are 6-25. Like, horrible before he comes in, horrible after he comes in. And so before he comes in the entire history of the Cincinnati Bengals, they have gone to 7. They went to 7 without Marvin Lewis. They went to 7 playoffs, 7 playoff appearances in like the 37 years without Marvin Lewis. In the 16 years with Marvin Lewis, they went to 7 playoffs. I know they didn't win any games, and that's going to be a huge knock on him. He chokes in the postseason. I get it. But the guy went to 7 playoffs with a team that had only been to the playoffs 7 times in the history of their career. So, like, keep things sort of in perspective here. Not to mention the 2005 team, they wound up losing to the eventual Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers, and that was when Carson Palmer blew his knee out. So there was a really good shot they were going to go really far that year. And then I want to say it was in 2015 maybe, where they had that game and they had the unnecessary roughness penalty at the end of the game. Like, they had that game won. And then they go and make stupid boneheaded plays. And maybe you could say that's on, Marvin Lewis for not being able to control his players and whatnot. Like, I understand that. But I think the lack of playoff success, while it is alarming at 0-7, it's not the worst thing that could happen. And that being said, if you were to bring in Marvin Lewis, I would try to pair him with an up-and-coming offensive coordinator, try to groom them to be the next head coach in, say, 2-3 years once a culture is sort of established. I don't think Marvin Lewis would be like a long-term end game for the Jets. I think it's a step in a process to rebuild the culture. Like, I don't think you necessarily need to hire the home run candidate right this second, but I get it. Another interesting thing about the whole Marvin Lewis thing is he's been under Herm Edwards most recently at ASU, and what that tells me is he's willing to take a head coaching position in the NFL and then sort of go back and be a defensive coordinator at the collegiate level. So he's willing to kind of swallow his pride. I'm sure he could have taken a head coaching job somewhere. The fact that he took a defensive coordinator job with Herm sort of shows a little bit of humility. Not to mention, if he comes to the NFL, maybe he can take their offensive line coach, Kevin Mawai, our longtime center. That would be pretty cool. What positions are we like really hurting at? We're not sure what our linebackers are going to look like with C.J. Mosley, and our offensive line could use a touch-up. So those are 2 areas that are very interesting. Not to mention, he has connections to A.J. Green, who's going to be a free agent this offseason. And while A.J. Green is older and past his prime, and you can consider him injury-prone at this point, he compares incredibly well to Denzel Mims. And when you look at Denzel Mims and A.J. Green, if Green can sort of teach Mims how to be a pro and even just be a stopgap for us at wide receiver, I don't think you bring in A.J. Green as your only wide receiver option. I would say you'd still bring in some type of wide receiver one, but at least there's some type of connection there. And if there was ever a guy to, get A.J. Green to leave the Bengals, I think it would be Marvin Lewis. And, whether that's good or bad, I'll leave that up to you guys. But I don't hate Marvin Lewis. This is like a C+ type hire for me, B-, because it's not like a flashy hire. It's not going to get me overly excited at all, but I can see the appeal of trying to bring him in. I can understand that at least. The next name that popped up on our list, and one that I'm really glad to have finally seen pop up, is Robert Saleh. He's the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers, and what he did this year, losing all the talent he lost on defense, was nothing short of amazing. This guy was also the defensive quality control coach when Seattle thumped the most prolific offense in league history when Peyton Manning went for like 5,400 yards and 55 touchdowns. They won in the Super Bowl 43-8. So this guy knows defense, and I know I'm not totally on the whole defensive coach front, but I think there is something to be said with a guy that can run the entire room. Like, this is a 41-year-old guy who seems to have a pretty strong command of that defense and knows how to work with the pieces that he's given. So I really like this. I think if you bring him in, you have to bring in a strong offensive coordinator, guys that you could link to him. Mike LaFleur, the passing game coordinator for the 49ers, is an interesting name. He is the brother to Matt LaFleur, the head coach in Green Bay. So I think there's a nice connection there, as well as Mike McDaniels, the run game coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. I'd be cool with either one of those guys being the OC here in New York. And I think that sort of establishes a really strong culture. I have thought that Kyle Shanahan is one of the best coaches in the league. And the 49ers organization, just in general, from like John Lynch on down, is just a very strong organization. So picking pieces off that type of coaching tree and trying to formulate, 49ers East Coast would be a very strong motivator for this type of move. Now, I don't think that this is a realistic hire, or at least I didn't think it was realistic. I thought for sure if you told me that, Robert Saleh is going to be a head coach somewhere, I would have thought Detroit, because he's from Michigan. It sounds like that's sort of the place where he's expected to go. But the fact that he was interviewing with teams after Detroit at least means that he's keeping his options open. And I like that. I'm good with that. I think at the very least you bring him in and you just sort of ask him what he thinks of Sam Darnold. And you think about this team, because they played us so early in the season. They had a game plan for Sam Darnold. Like, what are the strengths and weaknesses that you saw? Even if you don't hire him as the head coach, it's cool to get a little bit of recon from a guy who's so highly regarded on the defensive side of the ball. I like it. I like the way these interviews are going, and I'm not sold on any particular candidate yet. I hope they cast the net really wide like they're talking about. I would say Daboll is still pretty high up on my list right now. The whole Harbaugh thing is off to the side now. It sounds like he's got his contract signed over there, so I don't see that happening. I don't know. There's a lot of names that are going to pop over the next few days. What names have you not heard from that you'd like to hear from? What names have you heard that you really like? Let me know what you think of these three candidates down below in the comments. And as always, go Jets.